Hey everybody, welcome to the post-message Vodcast and podcast, where we're going to be discussing this last weekend's message and unpacking some of the content and asking some questions to help further your small group discussion. So we hope that you'll stay tuned. Want to introduce myself. I'm Ryan, pastor of adult ministries. Around the table we have Alicia.
Hello.
And Josh.
Well, hello.
And Jameson.
Hi there.
And John Bowles.
Hello.
And we are excited to be with you and just talk a little bit more about the weekend's message and how we can further discussion with that. So I want to turn it over to John to give us a summary of what we talked about this weekend.
Well, kind of the theme that was running through the weekend is we started with this passage in Matthew chapter 16, where the Pharisees and the Sadducees come to Jesus and they ask him for a miraculous sign. Prove who you are. And his answer is basically, you guys know how to tell what's happening in the weather by watching what's happening in the skies, but you're not able to read the signs around you. And then we picked that up later too, when Jesus is walking into Jerusalem and he's weeping over Jerusalem because they're just not paying attention. And so the whole crux of this weekend was, how do we pay attention to what's happening in the world around us? And how do we pay attention to what's happening in the lives around us to be able to get close enough to people to actually have conversation about God? And I think for me, one of the biggest parts of that is that whole thing is that we actually have to care about people. Right? We have to care about people, and we have to care about their lives and their struggles and their hopes and their fears. And it's interesting to somebody was telling me after they were talking to me about the message. And as a speaker, I know that you speak quite a bit too, and you've spoken before. When you put a message together like this, I think one of the things that helps it connect with people is when you're actually speaking from your own life. Mm-hmm. So I'm convicted by these things,
Absolutely.
Right? So it's not a matter of pointing the finger and saying this is what you need to do. Mm-hmm. These are the things that I need to learn. Mm-hmm.
So yeah. So was there anything in the weekend, because you have such a set amount of time, and sometimes we want to unpack things more than we have in a lot of time. So maybe we cut, we skim a little bit, maybe don't go as deep as we want to. Is there anything that you wish you could have unpacked a little bit more in your message this weekend that maybe would be of value to Lakesiders as they're entering into these discussions?
Sure. Well, I love telling stories. So there were a few stories that I cut out, actually. I told a story about my spiritual mom, and I could have told stories about her all day long. But I do think throughout the series we're going to see some more practical ways that we can read signs. So this week I think we set it up by saying we have to see people as human, right? We recognize that where we live, that we're all fast-paced, we're busy, so we need to create space in our own lives, right, and in our homes to be able to give people a place to slow down, right? And the other thing is we talked about our competitive nature, and so fighting for the things that actually count, and fighting for people. I think that set good groundwork. I would like to go further into that,
sure,
and help us to be able to maybe arrive at some of our own conclusions about how we can be better sign readers. Because I think there's some things that we can all gravitate towards, and then we're all individual. We all have things that we go, this is what I need to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would be interested to talk a little bit about, you said this statement, and I think it was very provocative for those of us who caught it, but you said, if you don't see people as human, don't talk to them about God.
I think it was a hand motion because it sounds like this.
Yeah, and I think we're always taught to talk about God, share our faith. Expand on that a little bit, because I think that could be helpful for us in this, especially in this climate right now where there's so much conflict and fighting and arguing, and not treating people or seeing people as human.
Yeah.
How do we do that? And what do you mean? Don't talk about God.
Yeah. Well, certainly don't talk about God in the ways that you see it modeled that makes you want to turn off Twitter and throw something at your television set and get off Facebook and sit at home and drink a bottle of Chardonnay. Don't do that. And we have those reactions to those things, and so let's just call it out. And let's just say it for those things. When we see other people talking about God and misrepresenting the church and misrepresenting God and the beautiful things that Jesus is inviting us into, it makes us angry, right? I mean, and it makes us sad. And so I think it's okay. I think Jesus was provocative in this way. I think he was always saying to people who said they were religious or religious leaders, he was saying, not so much. Stop. Stop saying that.
Right.
Think about things in this way. So I think, I don't think that was a new thought for me. I was just trying to say it in a different way than I think Jesus was always saying to people, don't do this. Don't cause people to stumble, right? Don't lead them down this path.
Well, and I interpreted it, I interpreted it more that it wasn't don't talk about God. It's like, change how you treat people and then talk to them about God.
Well, even taking kind of another comment you said about what Tani tells your kids about everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And even taking the verse, quick to listen, slow to speak.
Yeah.
And saying, take time first to get to know someone's story and where they've come from. Because if we just go on talking about what we're trying to get across, you never know by something you said could trigger something or in somebody because you don't know what their past is. And if you were first able to ask them who they were and listen to their story, and how you brought it across would be totally different because you know their background now.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said about building trust, and that's through vulnerability and pushing through differences. You know, you have to love others through their differences. I mean, grand scale and local scale, like personality-based differences. Sometimes it can be hard to spark a conversation, but just opening a table to discussion and building trust.
So this might be dangerous ground, so I'll preface this by saying that I have nothing against multi-level marketing or direct marketing or anything like that.
Well, that's good because I invited you to this meeting.
An
incredible opportunity.
Exactly. Right. Well, okay. So there was a time in my life when I was a little bit younger where it seemed like every week I was running into somebody who would say something to me like, you look like the kind of person that always has your ear to the ground for a good opportunity. And I'd know exactly what was going to come next, right? I knew exactly what, and it was off-putting, and it was disturbing. And in those conversations, I always went, this person doesn't care about me. They say they care about me. They're saying all the things they're supposed to say. But I know what they're doing. They're building a business. Now, again, I'm not faulting them. I get it. We're in business. Okay. Sure. But I think that sometimes God talk can come across like that to people, and that's it can go right that way. Or sometimes it's just angry. It's just like putting people in their place, or saying don't talk like that, or we don't do those things around here, or we politicize everything, and the world is just really angry with God talk right now. And so we absolutely, people need to hear that we care before they hear anything that we want to talk about when it comes to God.
Well, I think a lot of it ties into, you talked about the competitive nature that we wrestle with and how that interferes with seeing signs, but also in God talk, we've bought into this idea of winning. And you talk about the business side, multi-level marketing, and it's always getting a leg up or having the most victories, or how many souls have you won to Jesus? Type attitude of this competitiveness that it prevents us from slowing down and not being salespeople, but engaging in humanizing and relatable conversation that leads people to encounter God in a real way.
Yeah, which is exactly what Jesus lived out.
Right.
Because he wouldn't be going about doing that. He was the meekest, most humble person on earth.
Yeah.
Giving away his power to meet people where they are. At a well, in a desert, wherever you are. Yeah. That's just how Jesus lived.
Yeah.
Which is the opposite of our times.
Yeah, when you have that attitude, you don't slow down to read the signs.
Mhm.
Because you've already got an end game in mind. You've already got, I've got to get to this point. And even in basic conversations or, when you're trying to recruit somebody, you don't often slow down to be like, what are the social cues that I'm getting here? What are the signs that I'm seeing in this conversation?
Mhm.
How's the body language communicating, the receptiveness, and what might God be saying through the way that they're responding to me? We don't listen for the signs from God that might be coming through what is being said by that individual that we're talking to.
Yeah. Many years ago, I sold insurance, and so I went through a ton of sales training, and so I think I have a greater sensitivity to these things because sometimes I hear things through the sales pitch, kind of, through that lens. I see things through that lens, and so I'm very sensitive to conversations where somebody, when we talk about reading the signs, I don't want to say, always be looking for the opening to jump into the conversation.
Kick the door down type thing.
Yeah. That's what I was looking for. When I did sales, they taught us this thing called FORM. Family, occupation, recreation, money. If you can get somebody talking about those things, that's your in. So, hey, Josh, how you doing? We're doing pretty good. How's your family? If you want to keep talking about your family, now I've got an in.
Yeah.
And I find your weak spot, basically, for me to go for the jugular. And I just I don't think that's how it works.
Right.
So
that was God talk.
I think we pay attention to those little nudges, and we pay attention to the things that people are struggling with. But it's not so we could close the sale.
Yeah.
It's because we want to know them more.
Yeah.
And
so I'm curious. You shared this story this weekend about getting the Mercedes. I loved that story. I thought that was just super engaging. And I'm kind of curious on the receiving end, when people don't slow down and don't pay attention to the signs and don't, enter into kind of a relationship conversation to say, hey, what's the story behind this? You're a pastor and you're driving a Mercedes. Like, something is a disconnect for me. Like, what? Tell me the story behind this. How do you react? How do you almost turn the tables to where now you're reading the signs for someone who didn't read the signs in a conversation with you?
there's this great sales book, by the way, called
Form.
It's called, and this is helpful, it's called QBQ.
Okay.
Which is the question behind the question.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, if somebody had approached me about the car and they were inquisitive about it,
yeah.
I first of all, I wouldn't have had the reaction that I did,
right.
which just felt like an attack
Totally.
from them. But still, even in those moments, I do think it's wise for us as followers of Jesus to be able to breathe and say, what is the question behind the question that they're asking? There's something here that is deeper than why is my pastor driving a Mercedes? Maybe something they were taught, something they were brought up with, something they're teaching their kids, and so it kind of, it hits them, rubs them the wrong way.
Yeah.
Maybe they are jealous. Maybe they're going through financial struggles. Maybe they just lost their job. Maybe they give a lot to the church, and so they just want to make sure their money is being used wisely. There's so many different questions. And so it's always a conversation. I think the wise thing to do is not to be able to answer their question behind the question in that 5 minutes you're face to face with them. But I think it's a coffee conversation.
Sure.
Now, I think I'm wiser now, 30 years later, than when that stuff was happening, to be able to say, hey, we should go grab a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
Can I tell you the story of how I got this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
There's a beautiful story behind it.
Well, and it's beautiful because there's a story behind the relationship with you and Mike behind it too. It's not you just didn't stumble upon a car. Even that, if that were the case, then you could still tell them that story. But there's something even deeper behind you getting that car, and then you just see the beauty of building trust, relationship. It's its own mini God talk in its own way.
Yeah.
It's definitely when you're on the receiving end that you can demonstrate with your own awareness how to approach this, and how maybe you're showing that person who isn't aware of the signs, who isn't slowing down, who isn't engaging in relationship. You can kind of flip the tables and be like, well, you may not have done this for me, and not that you verbalize it, but like, you may not have done this for me, but I'm going to show you in the way that I respond how to do this, so that maybe in future conversations you've learned a new way, a new tactic, a new method to engage people.
Yeah, that was a good question.
So was there anything perhaps from the rest of the year on the table that was confusing, that maybe you want clarification from John on, that as small groups are sitting around and having this conversation, maybe that they're like, that I'm not really sure what to do with this, that comes to mind for you?
Well, another provocative statement that you said, which, by the way, we encourage that at Lakeside. That's one of the ways we know that we're being successful, is if we provoke people to think differently than they thought before they heard a message or had a conversation with somebody. So I say that with a positive connotation.
Right.
The provocative statement that you said that I think could be helpful to unpack a little bit is, and you did this on the weekend, but you held your Bible and you said, the Bible is not the point.
Yep.
Jesus is the point.
Yeah.
I think the provocative statement is, the Bible is not the point. And for many of us who've grown up in the church, the scriptures are this, incredibly beautiful and also confusing body of literary work that is sacred and challenging and encouraging, all these things, and we've been taught to kind of pull all of our focus onto this book. So when you say the Bible's not the point, like, what?
Yeah. I think it's possible to know much about the Bible and not know God.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's. I think there are people who are more well acquainted with the contents of the Bible than I am, that don't know God.
And know, let me interject.
Yeah, please.
Know the Bible in your head, for you podcast listeners not watching the Bible, or not watching the podcast. Vodcast. What is this thing?
Yeah.
Know in your mind, but not know in your heart. Like know we're in relationship
Right.
with God.
Yeah.
Right? Is
So
that what you mean? 'Cause you
cognitively.
cognitively know God.
You
but
can
not,
memorize it. You can know the history. You can
Right.
know the stories. You can know the reference. You can debate it.
Yes.
You can, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yes.
you know it in that way. You know it inside out.
Right.
Like you might know any piece of literature.
Right.
Like you might be well acquainted with any kind of poetic device. Right. And so the Bible is constantly inviting us into relationship with God. And so this is a precious book. These are beautiful, phenomenal stories that I believe, the book of Hebrews says that the Word of God is living and active and sharper than a two-edged sword. It pierces to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and it's able to judge the thoughts and intentions of the heart. I love that. Like that's now I committed that to memory because it's been an important verse for me. I could know that verse and not really kind of lean into that. I happen to know, as a follower of Jesus, that's absolutely true. That it's it's convicting and teaches me things about God, teaches me things about myself, about others. I see things in a new light all the time. It's vibrant. But knowing, memorizing, being well acquainted with this book is not the end game. And so by the time Jesus gets on the scene, right, when Jesus enters the scene, think about this, all we have is the Old Testament. Right? And Jesus is, he's always talking about the law and the prophets, right, which is kind of the sum of what's happening there. It was possible in that time to completely have memorized the Torah, and not know Jesus,
Mhm.
right? I mean, he's
Happened
just
often.
introducing himself.
Well,
into
and
the
Jesus
scene.
even says that you study the scriptures diligently,
Yep.
and yet you don't see that they point to me.
Yep.
You know, when talking to the religious leaders, and that's the same concept.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, it's not the point. It doesn't mean that we don't,
Mhm.
hold it in reverence, that we don't respect it.
Right.
It's not, I don't think it's just another book. I
Mhm.
think that there's something magically holy that I can't even explain that's happening here. But Jesus
Mhm.
is the point. And if you want to take that one step further, Jesus is always pointing to the Father.
Mhm.
He's saying, if you want to,
Pointing to one another
right,
and each other.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So for us to know God is the point.
Well, and if you look at the story of the Good Samaritan, he kind of does like a good example of that, where it's these religious leaders, these people who know,
Mm-hmm.
walking by, and it's the person who knows God the least that does what God would love the most.
Yeah.
You know, and I think he's saying it's beyond the know.
Mhm.
It's how you love the human. Like
Yeah.
this person knew nothing of that. They were Samaritans, farthest from God. Yet he loved them and saw them as human in the way God sees people.
Right.
Without knowing anything of the
Mhm.
scriptures.
Yeah, totally. And another thing we said this weekend is, and I really believe this, is God has way more invested in people than we do or we could ever imagine
Yeah.
doing. And so I always think it's interesting how we're surprised, like if we meet somebody who says they're not a Jesus follower, but they're acting in such a godly
Yes.
way.
Mhm.
Like they're saying beautiful things and helping people in these beautiful sacrificial ways, and sometimes we're convicted because we're like, dang, I've been calling myself a Jesus follower for 20 years. Well, that shouldn't really surprise us, because
Right.
God is constantly investing
Yeah.
in people, not only through the Bible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, but through a variety of ways.
Well,
And
you
so-
brought that up in the message. You said through Disney, through all these
Yeah.
Through
different,
Netflix.
like
Yeah.
which I
Yeah.
love. Where it's like, look for the signs.
Mhm.
Like he's everywhere.
Yeah, we're quick. We have a history. The church worldwide has a history of being quick to boycott things that aren't obviously stamped as,
Christian.
a Jesus product. And
Yeah.
God is so much bigger than that. He can say whatever he wants.
Yeah.
He always has.
Yeah.
He will continue to do it. So
Yeah, that's kind of getting pointed to Jesus, because Jesus lived that out. He ran to people constantly who, didn't tie into the social norms, all the outcasts that he interacted with. Like, man, that was
Well,
they
if
were
you think
contradictory
about
to
it,
the Bible.
He
That's
wasn't
for
like,
sure.
come to this thing at the at this place of worship and let's hang out.
Yeah.
He didn't say that. He's
Right.
like, he went to them where they were at,
Yep.
hanging out where they were,
At tables
and
of
just got
sinners.
to know them. And he didn't say, "Why don't you come here with me
Yeah.
after?" He didn't. He was, because he cared just about them and where they were in that space, and his motive was them,
Mhm.
not his gain or anything.
Well, I get the feeling that we could keep going for quite a while with the conversation, but we want to leave some of that space for our small groups. And so we just want to wrap it up here and encourage you guys to enter into this conversation about seeing the signs, where you need to slow down. You can find additional study questions and conversation questions that will be alongside this video. And we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep having these conversations, inviting you in to ask hard and difficult questions, but engage in really engaging God talk amongst yourselves and how you approach each other, and have fun with that, and really dive deeper with it. So thanks for joining us this time, and we will see you next week.
Yay.
yeah.
Cheers.
Peace.
Cheers.